very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to a pleasure and an honor to welcome to the program Mason Gaffney. He's a major economic theorist and also a general intellectual of a high order, and he's been a professor for a long time at the University of Riverside in California. He's written absolutely definitively, particularly on the contributions of a major figure in terms of economic understanding of the human condition, that being Henry George. We're going to be talking about that in some detail, and Mason, welcome so very, very much to Manhattan and to our humble abode here in Manhattan.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
It's my honor to welcome you indeed. You know, I wonder if you might be able to share with myself and the audience a little of your own personal background, a little born and raised in education, and then we want to share with some of the audience who may not be as aware or the importance of Henry George as a person in terms of the economic canon that informs the political process and everything else. But could you share a little of your own background, a little born and raised in education?
Sure. I used to go to church when I was a kid, and I forgot most of it. But I do remember one thing that academicians have forgotten, and that is you should not strain at a gnat while you swallow a camel. And, that, unfortunately, is what most economists do. And I would differentiate myself from other economists, if I may, by saying that I don't like to do that. I've just been to a meeting and listened to people do that for hours. And it's nowhere to find out. So I got interested in the work of Henry George because he was interested in straining out the camels. Now there are other economists who have done the same thing, and I don't think of myself as exclusively a Henry George enthusiast by any means. I like the works of the classical economists, for example. I like the works of some of the original Austrian economists. People who call themselves today, I think, have hijacked the original movement, and I don't have much use for them. But the original ones who really were from Austria.
Would that include Schumpeter or no?
He came later.
Okay.
Böhmerwerk was one, Meger was another, Wieser was another, and Wicksell, the Swedish Austrian, he was another. But they were concerned with the optimal use of capital, just as Henry George was concerned with the optimal use of land. So one of my books was called Towards Full Employment with Limited Land and Capital. And the idea was to use both optimally in order to give employment to labor. You got three factors of production: land, labor, and capital.
Okay.
And to make jobs for labor, you use land more intensively and you use capital more intensively. Now, using capital more intensively involves something that people find hard to grasp, so I'll just say it and I'll try to explain it. And then it's making it turn over faster.
Okay.
Or as Adam Smith put it, converting fixed capital into circulating capital.
Do you think of Adam Smith as being the father of modern economics? A lot of times he's quoted as the father of modern economics. And I wonder if you could, Gaffney, where were you born and raised and educated, if we could, to ground it in your person? You were born and raised and educated. And we'll get to George, but...
My father was a gypsy.
Was a what?
A gypsy.
A gypsy?
Like me. He was an academician.
So
So I was born in metropolitan New York.
okay.
Welcome
home. You've been out in California. You've had a little stay out in California, but
yeah. Well, Dad moved up to South Dakota when I was less than a year old, and so that was my first home. And then he moved back to New York, which he loved, to Great Neck out on Long Island.
Oh yeah, Great Neck. Yeah.
He didn't much care for the superintendent he had to work for there.
What kind of work was he doing?
He was a high school administrator.
Okay, good enough. Yeah.
And I was brought up on stories he told about his employer, whose name I won't mention, and a sycophant who kissed his butt.
Yeah.
May I use that expression?
Of course. So if it is cable television, you can use words more than that if you want. You know, that's right. Yeah, I understand.
So he was looking for a job around 1929. Terrible time to be looking for a job. But
Yeah.
he got lucky. Maybe he was talented.
Uh-huh.
Certainly was hardworking. And he got a job in a suburb of Chicago called Winnetka,
Yeah.
which is one of the few school districts that did not go bankrupt during the Depression.
Is that interesting? And not Wilmette. That was another town. Yeah. Okay.
And Wilmette was part of his territory.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
New Trier High School
Mhm.
comprehended Wilmette, Winnetka, Kenilworth.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. North. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's what I call home. It's what you did.
Uh-huh. And what was the family setting? Was it intellectually curious and encouraging and so forth around the dinner table and so forth? Or
My mother.
you're a major scholar, and I'm just wondering when you picked up on autodidactically, or were you always interested in learning? Because you're a major scholar, I'm just wondering the grounding that got you to a point where you could do such serious thinking and coordinating and communicating to the public about things that really matter intellectually.
My mother, she was a minister's daughter.
Uh-huh.
Her dad was a minister right over across the Brooklyn Bridge,
Oh.
Henry Street Presbyterian Church. And we used to drive on family trips together. She would quiz me and my brother on the state capitals. We were required to learn all the state capitals. And that was a nice way to pass the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we had a house full of books,
Yeah.
and there was no TV, and we had a summer place in southern Vermont, and the radio wouldn't even reach us then.
Yes. That's good.
There's nothing to do but read.
Uh-huh, right, I know. Did you have the Encyclopedia Britannica? I mean, were there on the shelf somewhere or something?
Some damn salesman sold us the
Yeah, right, they were everywhere. You had that. And we did that too when I was growing up with the Encyclopedia, and we had the Harvard Classics, you know, and things. So you could go, and you was encouraged to learn on your own and so forth, you know.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
very good library.
Being inner-directed in a certain sense, intellectually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love reading still. do.
Yeah, right, okay, yeah.
In fact, when I knew I was going to be drafted into the Air Force,
Second war, that would have been, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I wish we could say the second as though it were the last.
Thank you, we'll get to that, yeah, right.
Yeah, when I saw that coming, I had 3 months, I think, before my time came up. So I remember saying to myself, I can do whatever the hell I damn please for the next 3 months, it doesn't matter.
Right, right.
So what would I most like to do? Shall I go down to the old Howard and see the burlesque show?
Uh-huh.
Or should I try and pick up a few girls?
It's part of the game lots of times.
And then I pretty quickly figured out what I really wanted to do was to go over to the library at Winthrop House, that was one of the houses in Harvard where I lived,
Yeah.
and sink back in an easy chair and read books.
Okay, you sound like a scholar to me, yeah. Right.
That's what I really enjoyed doing.
So you were at Harvard then as an undergraduate? Is that it? We got
I
you at
started
Harvard
there as a freshman.
as a freshman, yeah.
And then when I came back from the war, I
Yeah.
decided I wanted to go to co-ed school because I
Okay.
really missed the girls.
Yeah, right, okay. Well, yeah, at that age particularly, yeah.
Went out to Reed College in Portland.
Oh, yeah, right, major school, yeah. Major, progressive school,
Yeah,
yeah.
turned out, I didn't realize it at the time, but William T. Foster was the president who shaped the character of Reed College.
Okay.
And he was the same Foster of Truthland and Foster, who wrote books about underconsumptionism,
Okay.
which was a predecessor of Keynes' ideas.
Okay.
Well, that had no direct impact on me, except that's the kind of school it was, where you could think your own thoughts.
We were discussing a little earlier, you got interested in history, I think you said, right?
I did.
Uh-huh.
That's partly because I found economics so deadly dull.
Uh-huh.
And abstract.
Uh-huh. You studied some economics at Harvard as an
I
undergrad?
took a freshman course in economics.
Yeah. You didn't know Paul Sweezy by any chance, did you?
Never had the privilege.
Oh, okay. And he was a professor that got thrown out for being a Marxist.
Probably so. Whenever somebody gets thrown out, they say that's why.
Yeah.
No.
No, he went on to found the Monthly Review, which is a major socialist journal, you know. These
Oh,
guys.
yeah. Oh, all of us kids used to read Monthly Review,
Yeah, he set that up.
I.F. Stone's Weekly, and all.
Yeah.
Left-wing rags we could get our hands on.
Yeah, right. There was a lot of it. There was a lot there. But so, anyway, so I'm just trying to get, and then you went to Harvard undergraduate right through after the war. You went through and took a degree in economics, or where did you
After
go?
the war, I came back to Reed College.
Oh, Reed College, right, okay.
I got my bachelor's degree there.
Okay.
Then I went to Berkeley for my Ph.D.
Okay, the Reed College degree was was it in a special field, or had you narrowed down?
What was even economics?
You were into economics by then. And
By that
your
time-
initial upset with economics, or you were bored with it, began to get, something got you to be interested in economics seriously as you have been throughout your career. But what got you into economics and having been not interested in it as an undergraduate or something? If I
I've
could
always
hear-
wondered about that, and I'm not really sure.
Okay, a good answer. I know what you mean. Yeah.
But at Reed, you could pick your own thesis topic.
Yeah, right.
So, getting back to the straining at gnats business, I thought, well, unemployment is what people are worried about.
Right.
So I'm going to write my dissertation or thesis, undergraduate thesis
Undergraduate, yeah.
on that.
Mhm.
And even at that open-minded school, people looked at me as though I was some kind of eccentric.
Okay,
Say, unemployment where? Unemployment in what industry?
okay.
What region? And yet the textbooks we were supposed to read, say, John Maynard Keynes'
Right, yeah.
book was called The General Theory of
Right.
Unemployment.
Right, that's right. Everybody was concerned with that. John Maynard Keynes was really all of the, the major institutions that were set up after the Second War was John Maynard, and in the 30s even, was influenced by John Maynard Keynes.
And these people were held up as models for us.
Yeah.
But if we tried to emulate them,
Uh-huh.
we were too ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
We were getting too big for our britches. We were supposed to read Keynes and believe what we saw there.
Yeah.
We weren't supposed to come up with anything.
You were mature in a time when Mr. Roosevelt had a major influence on the country, and we had the Great Depression around following 1929. And then there was the Bretton Woods meetings up in New Hampshire or something. Was a major point of establishing post-Depression and into the 30s and so forth, which was to become the New Deal following on the... And he was a major advisor, was he not, to the administration of Mr. Roosevelt and what was developing after the
All of the above,
crack.
except your timeline isn't quite right.
Okay,
Roosevelt became president in 1933,
right, yeah.
and Bretton Woods was in 1946.
Right, that was after the war, yeah.
And by that time, Roosevelt was dead or nearly dead.
Yeah, but was he informing President Roosevelt, Keynes, England, but in the New Deal policies that were being established in the 30s after the Depression, or not? Or who was influencing
Only
him?
indirectly.
Indirect, okay.
Roosevelt has his own coterie of advisors
Yeah.
who read Keynes,
Mm-hmm.
probably.
Mm.
It's not easy to read.
Mm.
And who certainly pushed him in that direction.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was that much personal contact between Keynes and Roosevelt.
Oh,
He
okay.
had his brain trust.
Yeah. Who would then have been influencing Mr. Roosevelt in the wake of the crash of '29? Who would have been the major influences? Theoretical economics, or, there's a whole canon that we can go to in terms of the canon of economic theory.
We had
And,
3 or 4 years between 1929 and becoming president.
yes, sir. Yeah.
He brought in the so-called Brains Trust, headed by Raymond Moley, the Columbia University.
Okay. That was an economic theoretician, Raymond Moore?
Oh, political science.
Political guy, okay, yeah, okay.
He was also very well wired with the Catholic Church hierarchy, as many of Roosevelt's advisors were, after all. He got elected with city machine support, and the Irish influence was surprisingly pervasive.
Okay, yeah.
And Moley, of course, was Irish. I don't know why I said of course, but
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, that's an average name. Yeah, and I'm trying to put this all together. And you were at Berkeley when you went in to do economics from Reed into Berkeley.
Yeah.
And who did you study with there? And you were getting seriously engaged in understanding economics. And to what degree, if at all, and we want to bring it up as a way of introducing Henry George to the audience here, because he had been a major figure in the 19th, 20th century in terms of theoretic understanding of economics. And everyone was concerned, how in the world are we going to avoid having another great crash like we did in Depression? That was influencing everyone's thinking of economic theorizing on into political notions of how we can possibly avoid that catastrophe that occurred in 29 and so forth, seems to me. And was Roosevelt or any of those people influenced by Henry George, or what had happened to his example? And where did Henry George fit into the canon that would include John Maynard Keynes, Schumpeter, Van Hayek, and the rest that were into the modern experience, if you can?
it's a long, complicated story, and I wrote a book about it called The Corruption of Economics.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
It was a fairly systematic attempt on the part of, how shall I say, members of the economic profession who were very oriented toward protecting the rights or the privileges of landowners.
Okay, okay.
And they actually recast economic theory, changed the vocabulary, changed the paradigm which people were allowed to think or encouraged to think, to do away with the classical economics paradigm in which George had thought and written.
Okay.
And they made a lot of changes, and it's miscalled the marginal revolution because it was a different kind of revolution. The essence of it, from the point of view of your question, was that they based a distinction between land and capital. To George and his classical predecessors, these were two very different factors.
Okay.
Land lasts forever, capital has a finite lifespan and has to be replaced. And that was central to the thinking of, say, John Stuart Mill, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and those guys.
Just to name a few of the lesser lights. I'm making a joke, you know. You're hitting some people right from Adam Smith forward, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really important,
By
yeah.
the way, not just forward, but before Adam Smith,
Yeah.
there was a French
Oh, is he?
economist, the physiocrat,
Yeah.
and a very outstanding Frenchman named Turgot.
Okay.
Shared a lot of thoughts with the physiocrats, but
Yeah.
did not like the label, so I'm careful not to call him a physiocrat.
Okay, yeah.
But he was a tutor of Adam Smith.
But, okay, but coming up more to Mr. Henry George, Henry George was a major figure that had the support of a good deal of the intellectual community of the world at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. Tolstoy, Mark Twain, all sorts of people of the intellectual class were great supporters of Henry George, and I'm wondering if the world in general is as aware of how important a figure he was to the intellectual class, and that we're trying to inform the political class, even in the early part of the 20th century and so forth. Well, do you understand what I'm saying? He was a major figure in terms of economic theorists. Did he fit into the overall canon of economic thinking, or was he outside of it, an outlier, or where did he fit in terms of those like Keynes and so forth that we talk about?
He fitted in with the classical, sorry for using the word paradigm.
Okay, that's all. No, I think it's perfectly good for you. Mr. Kuhn will be thanking you for that. Yeah.
He was the logical conclusion. The before him pussyfooted around.
Okay.
Even Ricardo understood the difference between land rent and the return to capital very clearly.
I think Ricardo's comparative advantage.
Well, that's because the people who have warped economic thinking
Thank you, yeah.
decided to identify him with comparative advantage.
Yeah. Well, that's all I've been having access to. We're trying to get at a more reasonable understanding of what actually was occurring, particularly in a progressive way that we can learn from now that is relevant to as we move ahead into policy decisions that could affect things now in the wake of the 2008 disaster that's come upon us again. How did that happen? Who was the one who said, who was a great theorist who said, we've reached a plateau of absolute security. Was it, I forget the name of the man, Fisher or somebody made a thing, he said, we've reached the plateau in 1929 and so forth.
That was
And
early
then-
fishing.
Yeah, and I mean, so how are we going to avoid it? So that's what I'm trying to put George in a leading position of questions that were relevant then, understood by the intellectual community as relevant, and are relevant today in a way that they should be given greater attention in order to get policy decisions that are moving in a direction that's good for the human condition in the
As
time
your
ahead.
quote from Fisher indicates, the economists at that time did not understand
Right,
the causes of the Depression.
right.
And Fisher's statement reveals it very clearly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's when the straining at gnats started. They didn't want to face up to the cause of the Depression, which George had spelled out fairly clearly many years earlier.
Yeah,
And the simple term for it is the cartel price umbrella syndrome.
the cartel price umbrella syndrome. Let's spell that out a little if you can.
Okay. Now, what does a cartel do?
Mhm.
It acquires control over a lot of natural resources,
Okay.
holds a lot of them off the market,
Mhm.
and so they can sell the rest at a higher price.
Right.
That is called a price umbrella.
Okay.
Under the shelter of that price umbrella, new resources come into the market.
Mhm.
And over a period of, say, 10 years, they come in such massive amounts that they break the market. And George said this is what happens to the land market. You have a period of exuberant land speculation, which means overpricing of land by absentee investors.
Okay. Yeah.
So that the little guys like Henry Ford was once,
Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh.
they can't get enough land to run their business
Okay.
without paying an arm and a leg for it. And so if Detroit gets choked off by this, that slowly brings in Toledo and Chicago and Indianapolis. And over the period of the 1920s, it brought in excess capacity. That broke the market.
Okay.
Meantime, the banks had been expanding credit based on the collateral of inflated land prices.
Because they would go up, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, inordinately, yeah.
And then when the land market collapsed, the banks collapsed along with it.
Yeah. And this has happened, I've read in some of your writing, every 18 years back to the beginning of time or something. I don't know if it's a generation thing that goes on that we do, but it's just incredible how there's been these things all the way back through time and continues.
You got it. We had one in 1991,
Yeah?
and then 18 years later, 17 years,
Yeah.
along comes 2008.
Yeah, yeah.
And now, guess what? We're starting up again.
Yeah.
And
Back on it's like on a treadmill or something, you know,
and people equate this with prosperity.
yeah, right, okay.
It's the only prosperity they know.
Mhm.
Now, George had a plan for abating land speculation by putting a tax on the value of land,
Okay.
which will hold down price. And then there's nothing crazy for the banks to lend on.
What causes the land value to go up larger than, let's just say, a wider portfolio of stock ownership in technology or something. Why does land appreciate so much in a unique way? Is that something intrinsic to George particularly? An understanding of that rather than just that as one capital asset where everything is going up in a boom kind of cycle?
I think he understood it better than a lot of people did. The reason land is more susceptible to that than other assets is because land lasts forever.
Okay.
It has an afterlife and then another afterlife.
Yeah.
So my friend who inherited a hardscrabble farm in western part of North Dakota used to complain to me about how hard life was when he was a kid there, how hard his parents had it, scratching a living out of that land. He never did sell it. And then they discovered the Bakken Formation underneath it.
The what?
The Bakken Formation.
Bakken? What is that?
It's a human name.
Oh.
It's a stratum of oil-bearing shale.
Oh, I see. Okay.
2 miles deep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's there now. It's being exploited now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Turned
lot.
out to be poor dirt farmers into multi-millionaires.
Oh, I didn't know that term. Okay, yeah, right. Okay.
And of course, that's not an isolated example.
And the land includes the natural resources that make up their part of the land, when you're thinking in terms of land like George did.
Yeah, he defined land as a classical economist that
Yeah.
would include all natural resources.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And underneath the surface, not only are there minerals, hydrocarbons,
All right.
they're out in the west, there's water.
Yeah, right. It's very important. Increasingly important on a planetary scale. Yeah.
And owing to the strange structure of water laws in our legal system, water is not considered property. It's held by license.
Yeah.
The advantage of that to the owner of the water license is that it's not subject to tax. So the most valuable resource in the country is held tax-free.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, that's the kind of window through which a lot of nonsense can go and so forth. He had these ideas, George had these ideas based on this kind of thinking that you are advocating in a very real sense that our political decision-making or our decision-making process take into account back that would have applied in the early part of this century. Were his ideas taken up by people in positions of political responsibility for the economy, or was it just people like Mark Twain and people on the margins of influence in terms of the political movement of the country? What was his influence in policy terms in that 19th, 20th century period leading up to the Great Depression?
During the period from about 1895 to 1929, he had a very profound influence on city policy.
City policy?
Yeah.
Okay.
City and state. But specifically, you can look at most of the big cities on the Pacific coast. They had Georgian policies. That is to say, they exempted buildings from the property tax, raised the rate on the remainder, which is land.
And that was inspired by George?
Inspired by George, in part.
In part, okay.
For example, the mayor of San Francisco, after the great fire and earthquake of 1906, was a co-author with George of his masterwork, Progress and Poverty.
Which we have here on the bookshelf we show. But anyway, yeah, Progress and Poverty was a major work,
Yeah, and he became mayor of San Francisco.
Okay.
And after the fire, San Francisco rebuilt itself, and they had plenty of tax revenues because they were already taxing mostly the land. And when the building flow got wiped out, they still had a tax base. They were able to borrow money and build this incredible public works that was associated with San Francisco. They were able to build the funicular railway, what do they call it? I mean, how many cities do you find built on hills and it's supposed to be built on a flat land?
Right. I understand, And it was based upon the land tax that was brought in there and keeping with George's thinking. That gave them a certain stability and progress for moving forward, right? And it should have been taken up, in your estimation and estimation of a number of people, it should have been taken up more broadly in terms of the national economy or the world economy.
Absolutely, but it was taken up surprisingly broadly. Cleveland, for example, had the most aggressive single tax mayor in the country. His name was Tom Johnson. And Detroit, I was talking to
You wrote a book about it, yeah, you wrote a book about it, yeah.
He's in Pingree. He was a follower of Henry George.
Was he? Okay.
And there was a network effect. That is, Cleveland, Johnson of Cleveland associated with Pingree of Detroit, and they associated with the mayor of Chicago, and they produced the mayor of Milwaukee, Daniel Hone, who carried these policies forward in Milwaukee, and all these great big cities. It was the golden age of America.
Absolutely. I'm from that part of the world, and it was a wonderful time when I was young in Detroit. I mean, it was booming.
Yeah, they blossomed.
Yeah.
And mass transit was a big part of it.
Yes.
They called it traction in those days. But they financed traction by taxing land values. And that let them keep fares low.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's kind of ironic that Michigan, the Motor City, whose best known product contributed to the destruction of mass transit, was itself a product of mass transit. Mass transit came first, and that attracted industry and population to Detroit. And that made the automobile industry possible.
They used to have interurbans. There were interurban train things and everything that were going around and transporting, yeah.
Oh, there were both kinds.
Yeah, they did the Red Line in Los Angeles, I think it was called, or something.
That's right.
Yeah, trolleys and, yeah.
Detroit played a big part in destroying the mass transit system of Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah.
Purchased by Detroit bankers.
Yeah.
Henry Ford II, as a matter of fact, held a big interest for a while, but the main villain out there was named Huntington.
That after the library, isn't there a library or an institution, Huntington Institute or something?
Oh, sure, these rich guys, it's like you've got the Rockefeller Institute.
Yeah, right.
Vanderbilt Institute. They were trying to restore their reputations, like Carnegie.
Did these developments pay homage, if that's the right term, maybe in quotes, to George? Or were they done without realizing where their influence or what they're thinking, or, do you understand? Because, and why is George not mentioned more on the lips of our policy setters now? Or let's say, even as we came up to 2008 and so forth, encouraging it, and yet we followed the same patterns that got us into trouble on this 18-year cycle, despite the fact George's thing, approach to things, would have introduced a progressive thing to help avoid those kind of catastrophes and level things out. Where does all that fit together in terms of what's emerged between, let's say, the Great Depression and 2013?
Like most simple questions, that's a complicated answer.
I sort of thought I would get that. Yeah, right.
But let's take the income tax. The personal income tax introduced in 1913 was amorphous.
Yeah.
It doesn't define income. It says Congress can tax income.
Yeah.
And the first congressional definition of taxable income was framed by a small group of congressmen that included Henry George Jr., Henry George's son.
Okay, and he was carrying on the
He was
paradigm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another one who was named Warren Worth Bailey, those two were perhaps most influenced. But they shaped the original income tax with the image of George's land value tax.
They did, really? Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting, yeah.
By that, I'm referring to 2 or 3 specific things. One is labor income was virtually untaxed.
Okay,
Wasn't
okay,
until-
that's interesting, yeah, okay, go on, yeah.
How are you going to collect an income tax from workers who are
Yeah,
hard to identify?
yeah.
Wasn't until 1942 when Congress passed the withholding tax.
Yeah.
And school teachers, like my dad,
Yeah.
they were exempt by law from income taxes. All state and public employees were. And as for capital income, they worked out a system of fast write-off, which many people today see as a loophole just as bad as any other loophole. But it has the effect of encouraging investment in new capital because you can write it off faster than it actually depreciates.
Wow, okay, yeah. And that's before they had the derivatives, the swaps and derivatives and things, as reinsuring against risk in the economic order.
It was
New things were being developed in the more modern experience. Yeah.
It was not simpler then. Even then it was new and a lot of people had a hard time understanding it. I know I did at first.
Yeah.
But then when people began to catch on, along they came with these items you mentioned and a dozen others.
Yeah.
But
they got to be with physics, with algorithms and things that were just hardly able to be understood at all when they got into very elaborate ways of dealing with derivatives. And so they got to be you had the calculus, and it was like formulas and things that were so complicated nobody could really even explain it to anybody who could understand what the hell it really is doing, except it was something that became a way of dealing with the various levels of risk in the economic order, giving reinsuring or insurance against loss that was taken advantage of by the bankers.
One name that explains all that is mortgage-backed securities.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That was the big thing, the risky thing, and what's a mortgage? It's a lien on land.
Yeah. Okay.
And the boom and bust in land values, along the lines that George had outlined earlier, made the mortgage-backed securities first rise up reasonably high, and then collapse along with real estate values. And since the banks were heavily into that, it made the banks collapse. And so the financial crisis is based in substantial part on the land.
It's 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Going back to 1991, that was the savings and loan crisis.
In Silverado or something. Yeah.
And that was based on real estate also.
Yes, was it really? Yeah, okay, it was, in that. And yet, in other way, if you look at the thing in a certain way, that the value, let's say, for the mass of the population having a pattern in general, as it's throughout human history in a certain sense, we generally had a small group of people who owned all the productive capital and land, whether it was the emperors of Rome or the hereditary families of Europe, and it was based upon them having, in a certain sense, past savings that they could use as collateral to make it, let's just say, to bring it into modern thinking, where you could make an investment in a product, something, rather than depending only on past savings as they were able to do in order to make an investment that's going to pay for itself out of its future earnings, rather than only out of past savings. That was something that was limited to the relatively plutocratic few who were able to do that. And so...
It's gotten worse over time.
Yeah, I think it has, hasn't it? But in any case, but for the lower levels of society, working class or middle working class, one way in which they were able to develop, let's just say from the end of the Second World War up until more recently, the way they were able to build net worth was they wouldn't have access to capital that will be able to be financed in terms of future earnings that are, pays for itself in 6 or 7 years. And so people can build up more and more. But what they did have was the steady increase in the value of housing. They would be able to have a house that is they would buy it for $5,000, 10 years out it would be worth $10,000. or maybe 15, or, you know, up like that. And the value of the housing went up just almost steady as a rock for decades after decades after decades, did it not? And that's the way that lower middle class, or lower class, and lower middle class, and so on, got some net worth that they were able to do by selling the house that appreciated in value over decades, long period of time. How does all that fit into the overall pattern that George was talking about, and the subprime?
They were co-opted into the system.
Well, co-opted, but I think at the time that they were realizing a larger net worth that brought them into the middle or upper middle class values and income by selling the house 10 years out for twice, 3 times what it was bought for, was the way in which they built up some net worth, which it hadn't been doing throughout all of human history. It's always been a few people owned everything, and everybody else are like serfs, you know, or something. I don't know, maybe get into
Bismarck had this all figured out.
Did he?
In the 19th century.
He did, yeah.
He says we've got to build up a cadre of small farmers as a buffer to protect the big ones against the proletarians.
Okay, there was 1848, yeah. Uh-huh.
And it was the same in most countries of Europe.
Yeah.
I think that idea originated in Belgium with the Lavalade, but at any rate, it was universal. And Teddy Roosevelt, he did the same thing in the United States.
Okay.
He pushed for small owners to protect big owners, of which he was one. I don't mean to dump on Teddy Roosevelt as President's goal. He was a good guy.
Yeah, he got a lot of conservation done and other things. Yeah, he was against the malefactors of great wealth. Or was that Mr. Roosevelt, I guess? But anyway, yeah.
So he created the malefactors of small wealth.
Okay,
Who could be counted on to vote in certain.
yeah. Well, that's the thought.
And
Yeah.
we've been stuck with him ever since.
Uh-huh.
So, how did we get into this?
Well, it says that the importance of a land tax, and a land tax and a way of having some sort of thing to it. What about just a tax? What about the other aspects of production other than the land? Does that include industrial plant and equipment and that sort of thing in terms of the distinction, the general distinction between labor and capital? Capital ownership, there could be ownership of machinery and technology and that sort of thing, other than the land tax thing, that George seemed to be thinking or distinguishing, so that you could, do you understand how does it's not just the land, but the resource base of the land in terms of the land and the minerals and so forth, it's also the improvements that are put and have value in terms of the economy that has to be dealt with, the disparity between those who own that, and then also Keynes warned in 1930 against massive technologically induced unemployment that was going to be a characteristic of the future generation in their maturity, which is about now, and that the unemployment pitting labor, all the assets are owned by a tiny plutocratic class, and the people are not going to be needed in the way that they had for labor claim upon income for what it is they participate in the productive process.
Well, I'm too young to have data on all these things that you mentioned, but I have pulled together data on parts of it.
Yeah. You surely have, your writing's magnificent.
Housing and farmland. And in those two cases, I can attest and produce the data to show that the land element is much more concentrated in ownership than the building element.
Interesting. Okay.
And that calls for a modicum of statistical sophistication. But when I say a modicum, I mean anybody can understand it.
Okay, good.
But you have to stop and think about it a while.
Yes.
For example, let's take Rancho Santa Fe near San Diego.
Okay.
That has the highest income per capita of any city California.
Is that right? Okay. Huh?
So for this city and dozens of others, I've ranked them in order of wealth per capita,
Okay.
residential wealth.
Yes.
And everybody says, you know, industry is concentrated, but residences are equally distributed.
Okay.
My data show otherwise.
Really?
Rancho Santa Fe not only has the highest income per capita, it has the highest housing value per capita. And inside the housing sector, the ratio of land value to building value is much higher in Rancho Santa Fe than it is in the average city in California.
Interesting. What does that tell us about in terms of larger pattern?
It tells us that rich people don't live scattered among the general population. They cluster with each other. They don't cluster in the sense that they huddle together.
Yeah.
They cluster on enormous tracts of land.
Yeah.
And William Randolph Hearst's San Simeon is a
Yes.
great example.
Yeah.
But that mansion was located on 60,000 acres, including 17 miles of coastal.
Yes.
So that is perhaps an extreme case, but there's a definite preference. What do economists call it? Superior goods. As your income goes up, your consumption turns towards certain kinds of goods as opposed to others.
Right.
Spend a smaller fraction on potatoes and a higher fraction on luxuries.
Or yachts.
And yachts.
Yes.
It's a luxury of luxuries.
Right.
And residential assets are among the biggest of these. Adam Smith had a nice way of putting it. Of course, this was a long time ago.
Yes, sir.
Some things never change.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
He said the chief satisfaction in owning a big house is not the riches, it's the display of riches.
Yes. Keeping ahead of the Joneses. Not just
Yeah.
keeping up with, but keeping ahead. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
but-
status. Yeah.
That was
Status
his-
seekers.
That's the keeping ahead of the Sultan of Brunei.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Right.
Like Barry Ellison,
Yeah. Oracle.
a rich man out in California. He's become famous for his competition with the Sultan for having the longest yacht in the world.
The failing implications still present themselves. Yes. Yeah.
And most of these yachts have to be berthed somewhere,
Sure. Absolutely.
and they have to be berthed usually on a seacoast, and there's only so much land there.
Yeah.
So you have to control that land. And of course, you go out in Long Island Sound, look at the North Shore and the South Shore of Long Island Sound. The fishermen aren't there anymore. They've been chased out by the yachties.
Right.
And on the Pacific coast, it's the same story, and all around the world, it's the same story. So, although the yacht itself may use the open seas, and God bless them, I hope they survive,
Yeah.
but the owners of the yacht have to have a place to keep the yacht.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that involves some of the most valuable space.
Yes, indeed. I can see that. Yeah.
So, anyways, just as far as the housing part, I mentioned wealth per capita.
Yes.
So in the case of housing, people aren't satisfied with one house if they have enough money. Like John McCain.
John McCain got 20 houses or 7 or 8, and they're
Forgot
all
how many houses.
Yeah, right. Can't remember which of the houses that we're talking about. Yeah, yeah. Is that an investment strategy or something, or created wealth, an accumulation of value, or what causes them to be doing that other than?
I'm not a
eating?
psychologist.
Okay, yeah. Well,
But
maybe that's hard to encompass. Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to figure. I mean, for me, one house is all I can handle.
Yeah, I'm hip. I understand it. Yeah.
But the average middle class guy or gal,
Yeah.
as soon as they reach a medium level of income, they want to have a vacation house.
Yeah.
Northern Wisconsin is full of it.
Is it? Yeah, I guess that, yeah, right.
And then in Milwaukee or
Yeah.
Chicago, you want to have a place by a little lake out
Yeah,
in the lake country of Wisconsin. And there's one called Eagle River Resort Town up by Lake Superior. It has the highest housing value per capita in the state of Wisconsin.
huh, okay.
Nobody ever heard of it,
Uh-huh.
but to be next to the lake, to have access to the lake, people pay big premium. Anyway, that's residential land. Now you take farmland.
Yes.
There's been a big revolution since about 1935.
35. Dust Bowl.
The Dust Bowl and the farm programs.
Yes.
And that, of course, increased the cash income of farmers, farm programs. Where to put a floor under the bad times. But there was no ceiling in good times.
Okay.
And there were two things that happened about
They
19...
tore up the soil there in the Dust Bowl. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
It went over the west like a swarm of locusts.
yeah.
And then they came out to California and were treated like vermin.
Thank you, Mr. John Steinbeck and Grace the Right, and the Joes, yes, yeah. They just had a wonderful three-part documentary on that Ken Burns put together. Public television was magnificent, great photography and so forth.
Oh,
About that. It was really magnificent, yeah, on public television. Didn't mean to,
I like to see it.
yeah.
So, anyway, in 1935 was the peak. I shouldn't say it was the peak, it was the foot before a sharp incline in concentration of housing. Now, concentration can be measured in several different ways, but let's just take one, which is the average size of the farm.
Okay, yeah.
Up until 1935, the average size of the farm unit in the United States was about 180 acres.
160 is the square, yeah, okay, yeah. The homestead was something. I think that was the size of a homestead that was allowed after the
Yeah,
Homestead
that's
Act
right.
in 1862.
And that had a big effect on why that was around 160 acres.
Yeah, right,
But anyway, it started soaring after that until now it's up around 3,000 or 4,000.
Yeah, getting to be pretty large size, yeah, yeah. And that would reflect the combine and the other kinds of ways of machinery being able to be introduced into the process.
Well, that's where the Marxists and the technological determinists have misled us, I think, a little bit.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Because Cyrus Picoric invented the reaper back in 1835.
Really, that far back? I didn't realize that. Yeah, okay.
It was made in
That's
Chicago.
well, okay, that's true, yeah.
And one of his sons founded the Chicago Tribune, which I can't say so much for. But anyway, Henry George actually wrote about the great machine reaped wheat fields of the Dakotas. This was where his forecast was a little premature. He said, owing to these machines, we're going to have vast concentration in farming. Well, that didn't start to happen until 1935.
Okay, that's the year I was born. That's the year I was born, 1935.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, yeah.
You're just a kid.
Yeah.
I was born in 1923.
God bless you, sir. God bless you, yeah.
So, the number of farms in the United States, and this is the easy figure to remember, it dropped from 6 million
Okay,
in 1935 to 1 million
wow,
at present.
huge, yeah,
From
right.
6 down to 1.
Yeah, and the farm size got huge. Yeah.
Correspondingly, the farms got bigger. And as they did so, various statistical measures of concentration, like the top 1% versus
Yeah.
the bottom 99%,
Right,
they grew more and more concentrated.
yeah.
And I went over these data with a fine-tooth comb.
Okay, yeah, you have, I know, yeah.
Not only did the area grow more concentrated, but the quality of the land grew more concentrated. And as a measure of that, I took irrigated acreage.
Yeah.
And irrigated land, which in 1900 was the refuge of the small guy with mud on his boots
Right.
against the big ranchers on their horses looking down on these peons.
Yeah, right.
Uh, the irrigated land has mostly been taken over by giant landowners.
Right. Aquifers and, yeah.
Yeah, they control the aquifers on here.
Imperial Valley in California.
Imperial.
Yeah.
And they become the plaything of absentee investors from
Yeah.
the east,
Uh-huh.
like the Bass Brothers of Fort Worth. They bought up thousands of acres of land in the Imperial Valley
Yeah.
in order to control the water
Yeah.
that goes with it.
Yeah. Increasingly, that's
And
it.
that water comes from the Colorado River,
Yeah.
and it's supplied free,
Yeah.
charge,
Yeah.
by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah.
It's regulated by Hoover Dam,
Yeah. Right.
by the big one up above Hoover Dam,
Yeah.
the Glen Canyon Dam.
Made that room like room in the desert. We only got a couple of minutes left on the program, sad to say. We could go on talking 25 hours, easy. But the legacy of Mr. Henry George and your writing and so forth, what, just in a thumbnail kind of way, would be policy decisions or policy stances for our political leadership to take that could reflect in a timely way the contributions of an understanding that you have and that Henry George helped give you and your own understanding in terms of dealing with the economy now in the year 2013.
The policy
Just a
makers
couple
today,
minutes left.
the disciples of Milton Friedman, let's say, who's no longer with us, God bless him, they say there is no such thing as a free lunch.
They've always said that.
Yeah, a very dismal thought,
Yes.
but there is such a thing as a free lunch. What they say is if you're going to raise tax rates, you're going to ruin the economy.
Yeah, right.
So if you want to support the public schools,
Yeah.
if you want to support our military, which I choose not to, but
Yeah, I understand.
my personal views, if you want to support social welfare, social
Yeah.
security, all the things that we've got listed,
Yeah,
you can't do it without ruining the economy.
yeah, all the sequesters.
Now, Henry George says that's all bullshit.
Yeah,
If you raise the tax rate on land, the land won't go away.
that's true,
You
yeah.
can collect any amount of money you want to, just by raising the tax rate. And that'll let you lower tax rates on sales, income from labor, income from productive investments, and,
Help the economy grow.
yeah.
So that's a basic premise that should be taken up by our policy decision makers and so forth, and that's what you would recommend to them.
Amen, brother.
Okay, well, listen, I mean, we could go on talking and everything like that, but I think we've come to the end because we've run out of time. It's the tyranny of time. There's never enough time. It's your pleasure in the audience to have the perceptions of a major economic theorist and an intellectual of the highest order as being Mason Gaffney. And Mason, thanks so much for setting aside time here in your short visit to New York. It's a great pleasure and honor to have met you, and thank you very much for all your contributions and such a very well-led life, if I may say so.
If you only knew.
Thank you. That's coming up chapter 2, the underbelly of Mr. Gaffney. Okay, thank you very much for viewing. That's it for now. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Once again, Mason, thank you very, very much for coming in and sharing your wisdom, with the audience. Thank you for viewing. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Thank you. So,
59 minutes, very good.
yeah, 59 was at the beginning. Yeah, okay, that's good. Well, so we went on, and it was really good. Thank you very much.
It was a great interview. It was a great interview.
I have to interview you now. I have 20,000 questions.
Well, I'm not an interviewer. An interview is different than a conversation. An interview bespeaks structure.
You want me to cut out, Bubble?
Yeah, that's right.
Babu, want me to cut out now?
A conversation is more spontaneous, like jam session.
Babu,
What?
want me to cut out?
No, just let it go. It doesn't matter.
Okay, great.
Just stop. So it's like a jam session. You're playing a trumpet, I'm playing the trombone, and it's just spontaneous. It's not structured.
Okay.
Now that structure helps a lot, you know, to think.
Oh, yeah.
But I just like spontaneous because
You've been doing this for years.
Oh, 45, and in the 45 years, we've been doing this since university. And I believe in it. It has to do with pattern recognition that the computers are making possible. I had a friend who took AOL public, and his dad was in the room with Norbert Wiener when they coined the term. He's the father of computers. It goes back to Turing, but he's the father. And he said that one of the things about the computer is going exponential. I can't believe the way this curve is going like this now. It's going almost straight up L. And he said, information overload, which we're being committed to now, is coming in every day. Mason comes 12 new breakthroughs in every field coming in over the transit. But information overload permits pattern recognition. So instead of going in great depth in one thing, you want to step up and you want to look at patterns. Economics, priority, Big Bang, a theory of evolution, theory of how the universe was formed, everything. There should be in the university department of everything. And they're breaking it down and dividing and conquering the intellectual community. It seems to me like they did what the colonial powers did in Africa. And because they're becoming so highly specialized, and the FBI won't talk to the CIA. They're all tunnel vision, and they got all these bureaucratic protecting their backside and everything. And what you should have is pattern recognition or comprehensive understanding of what the hell's going on.